Welcome, Catherine Victoria Addor, founder of Adoration Innovation Services from Packard, New York,
hmm
and the author of Beyond the Building, Formulating 100% in the autumn issue of Legacy, Transformation, and Action. It was a great article. It was the lead article for the entire issue.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, you talk right off the bat about the myth of the 100% school day, and it's so critical to the core of how we think about education evolving. Tell us about that concept, the myth of 100%.
A while back, I started with this formula that I created in regards to the number of hours that a child actually spends in school, right?
Yeah,
And there are actually two formulas that I use, birth to age 18 and birth to approximately age 80, or standard life of a human being, right?
sure. Yeah,
When you take the number of hours in a day and the number of days in a year and the number of hours in a school day and the number of school days a child spends in school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, between birth and age 80, they spend approximately 2% of their time in a formal school setting, or what we consider
wow.
formal school from K to 12th grade or those 13 years.
Yeah,
When you do it the other way from birth to age 18, it comes out to something around 9% of their time, still not 100% of their time. The
right.
idea being that we design or we spend all of our time preparing students for to succeed in the classroom, and we're not preparing them to succeed in life, where they spend 98% of their time. There have been people who have argued back to me that they spend 25% of their day in a classroom, that that a lot of that time is spent sleeping, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I
Yeah,
point out to them where they sleep, who they're with at night, whether or not they feel security. Um, all of those other days when we have children going home on Friday afternoons, not knowing if they will have access to food over the weekend.
right.
um, what are we planning for? How are we planning? And then people start to say, "Oh, wait a minute.
Right, right.
There's
Because,
more to this."
well, we make so many assumptions about education as a service we deliver. That's the old model.
hmm
And you say it, I think you kind of sum it up at the end of the article. You say this is about seeing more, listening more, partnering differently. It's about having the courage to build schools that truly belong to the communities they serve. And I love that summary of the entire piece. Your voice is so authentic because you've done the work all these years. So when you speak to this, there's just this command of the subject,
hmm
and it comes through loud and clear in the article. Um, you reference this as an ecological whole child endeavor, which is near and dear to my heart. Talk about that. What does that mean in layman's terms or stakeholders' terms?
An ecological all child endeavor.
Yeah.
The idea, it actually, it's the theoretical framework of my dissertation, which is on parental engagement, our parent and caregiver engagement in schools.
Yes.
And it's Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, which
I
is
gotcha.
the concept that you start at the center with the child and you move further and further out in the rings, and each of those concentric rings, microsystem, macrosystem, have a certain amount of impact or differing impact on child as they develop, right? It's
Sure.
basically parents impact them, siblings impact them, community impacts them, society impacts them, the world, what's going on in the world and the conditions of the world impact them. And if there's disruption in any one of those systems, then children have experiences that are not necessarily ideal for their personal growth, for their education, all of those different pieces. The dissertation focused on the concept that during the pandemic, there was actually a worldwide breakdown in those systems,
Yeah.
and parents or caregivers had to take over the nurturing piece and the curriculum piece and the learning piece and the innovation piece of children and their education, especially during the quarantine period. And we, you go back to that whole child statement, and In education, we look at when we say the words whole child, sometimes people look at them and say that's education speak from 30 years ago or
Right.
and the such, but I can't get away from, I've never gotten away from it. Um, in writing a philosophy of education,
Hmm.
I just boiled it all down to the word all, right? And all children, all community, all people, all aspects, all of it. And I can't disconnect that from this idea of the whole child.
Thank you. I'm
Yeah.
glad you can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think about this, and it's like I'll do a comparison, a parallel example. Um, in my years at ASCD, there was always talk about publishing across globally outside the US. We're very US centric, very successful. And the conversation will come up, well, why aren't we publishing all over the world? And we immediately get hit with, well, we need translations for all these different languages. There's laws for distribution in different countries. There's different kinds of commerce and currency. And so we would just beat it to death until, okay, well, I guess we're not ready to do that. We don't have the capacity to do that. Now, shift and look at schools. Who wouldn't be in favor of the whole child? Who wouldn't be in favor of all the things we're talking about? And you make such a powerful case for it. And yet, as soon as we walk into our buildings and sit down with our staffs and answer to our school boards, we have all these reasons why we don't have the capacity, we don't have the resources. How would we even begin to backwards design this to meet all these needs beyond the school day? What was your experience with that kind of, you bring the aspiration and then you hit the resistance? And how do you think about that, knowing, well, looking at everything we're facing in public education today?
It's a At the end of the day, it's just an argument in where do you want to spend your time spinning your wheels, right? Um, Bringing it down to a micro example. I had elementary teachers who were having, students were having behavior problems on the playgrounds, and we put all of these different things in place regarding expectations. We had actually a playground curriculum that our school monitors were utilizing on the playground where we were teaching cooperative games. They were in certain corners. They knew students that they were watching, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when one of the things that we wanted to implement is as they were walking out, we wanted to have the students articulate what the playground rules were and what they looked like. And then on their way back in, we wanted them to talk about their positive experiences on the playground and ways that they saw those things. And the people who were in the classroom or in the room when we were having that conversation and talking about the next thing that we were going to do said they should know it. They're old enough to know how they're supposed to act. We don't have to repeat this, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, okay, how much time a day is spent having the discipline conversations with them after they're coming in from the playground?
Right.
And how much time are we spending having the conversations regarding the expectation of behavior and then the manifestation of the expectation of behavior from their point of view, giving them agency and having this conversation about how they themselves are interacting in the playground? Where do you want to spend your time?
And that puts the
Right.
onus back on, yes.
And it's the same when you go back out into the bigger picture and say, well, we're working with these students, we're doing this, we're doing that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we're at the receiving end of behaviors, of shifts in learning, of disruptions in education, in failure to access resources, and all the rest of that. So we're either spending our time with the outfall of all of that, or
Mhm.
we're spending our time creating systems that allow us to get ahead of those things that are happening in children's lives. Where do you want to spend your time? Cleaning up or providing structure? And at the
Yeah.
end of the day, I'd really rather spend my time creating relationships and providing structure.
When you think of it, I'm processing as you're talking, whether you're talking about instruction or classroom management or anything else that runs the gamut in a classroom, so much of what we have done historically has been reactive. You know, these are the needs, these are the reactions to behaviors, these are the deficits. And we wind up spending all our time responding to all these things instead of getting ahead of it and being proactive. And if we are, and we are, the childhood experts and the learning experts and the cognition experts, then we should have the wherewithal to be able to get ahead of it, right?
Mhm. Yeah. And I've worked in school districts where everything from renting space in the lower level of the building for dental services that would come into the building, and
Mhm.
parents would stay after school to access appointments that were available to that right on the premises. I've been in districts where we're sending people are coming in with support services for instance, food related needs. And those things are being distributed from the property prior to vacations and at the end of the day or prior to the weekends, where we're doing it right at the source and bringing those community organizations in to work with us.
Yeah,
Even during COVID, I worked in a district where we did food distribution. We already had access to the resources of being able to move the buses, right? And the students were home. Well, we can move the buses on those same patterns and deliver breakfast and lunch in those in that capacity right out into our community. And we were able to do that pretty much every single day as soon as we got it up and running. We just have to think more creatively about how we make those partnerships. Um, we went for, in one school district, we went for grants. We take for granted this idea that children have access to the arts and they have access to ballet lessons or swimming lessons or all of these different things. And when in actuality, that's not necessarily the structure for many families.
right.
So partnering with agencies, given the location of the last school district that it was in, partnering
Mhm.
with agencies that had access to those things, bringing in ballet for our third graders, partnering with the we brought in the on the Chess Foundation. I don't know why
Yeah.
the name National Chess Foundation,
Hmm.
and that was part of our arts and education program, but that was giving us our um, before school program,
Yes.
not just bringing the students in, sitting in the cafeteria and giving them some puzzles to do, but we brought them in and had them in the mornings, and our students who were in our before school programs at the elementary level were participating in these huge learning of chess and these chess challenges. Thinking of creative ways to partner and creative ways to be with your community, and bring those things in. We have another situation in the same district where we were partnering with United Way to have our after school program. We were running our after school programs from the bell to 7 p.m. And instead of having conversations with them about things like, well, how are students getting home at the end of the day if parents don't have access to those resources? Well, the United Way was feeding them dinner. Those were resources that were coming from that organization.
Hmm.
We were providing the site, but they were providing the staff, the educational experiences, the food, and they were paying local or Uber type drivers
Yeah.
to bring parents to the building to pick up their children and bring them home. They were utilizing a voucher system to be able to pay for that. And suddenly, our school district has a basically extensive after school program to allow for our community to work the hours that they do,
Yes.
to provide the resources that they need, but the district itself isn't paying for per se for those resources out of the general budget. It's having conversations, building relationships, and ensuring that you just think about how you're using your buildings differently.
I love those examples.
Yeah.
Um, uh, there's so many things about your article that are successful, and at least in the first half of it, just nailing these things down and defining them and calling them out is a huge thing in and of itself. We go through the motions as educators our entire career and don't necessarily have the luxury of stopping and thinking about defining these things. And so when you say engagement is relational, not transactional, It grows in the spaces between formal school activities and how we communicate, invite, listen, and co-create. It's just wow. It's like there it is. That's that's what we're talking about. You just shared some examples, but when you say it's more relational, what does that look like when we're talking about community stakeholders that may not even have kids in the schools, agencies that can enhance programs, like in the examples you just shared? How do we shift from being more transactional to being more relational?
The transactional examples that I utilize in my dissertation and also in the article
Hmm.
really focus on this idea that we believe engagement is parents showing up to curriculum night or parents showing up to the arts presentation, attendance at a school concert or a school conference, whatever that is.
Right.
And somehow we believe that that type of involvement is actually engagement. It's when, in fact, that's ticking off a box or making a connection or showing a performance, but it's performative. It's performative of a relationship. You're
Mm.
not building, you're not connecting. The relationship part of it is in the district that my own children go to school in. There is a song that the band uses at the high school level, 9 through 12, at the end of every single winter concert.
Uh,
Right. And this is decades and decades and decades and decades of musicians
yeah.
are invited back every single year to play
Wow.
along with the current students in that band playing that song at the end of the concert. So
Wow.
it's creating this relationship and creating this system that allows alumni to keep coming back into the building, to keep being part of what it is to be to for children to see multi-generational people who benefited from the experience of having been involved in that arts activity and wanting
Yeah.
to come back and be a part of it again. And it's just thinking about ensuring that you know what's going on in your community, ensuring that you show up at your local weekend events that are put on by your Lions Club or Rotary or local town government and seeing what services they're providing and finding the ways that the two of you can provide those things together.
Yeah.
It beyond our walls. When you have those relationships, when you can pick up the telephone and not just be sitting down for the first time and saying, "Hi, I am so and so. I would like to do X, Y, and Z."
Right.
It's instead, for the last 2 years, how when we've gotten together at this particular thing, this need has shown up. Well, I figured out a way that we could partner together to ensure that we're providing something there. Do you
Mhm.
have time for lunch tomorrow? Let's, sit and chat. And
Right.
especially with the advent and more prevalent use of technology, such as the one we're using right now, you have
Yes.
an opportunity to be able to make those connections even better. So, it's knowing people, it's spending the time. I have the example of the telephone call that was about homework.
Yeah.
And having gotten the telephone call, I was aware that there was a parent that was concerned about homework and the student bringing home homework. It was an elementary age student, and that it wasn't getting done. And they asked that homework never be sent home to their house because it was causing more
Wow.
problems. And we had all kinds of conversations about ways to ensure that the assignments were things that were not overwhelming, that were engaging the parent. I had the telephone call after school one day. The child must have gotten off the bus, taken a piece of paper out of their backpack. It had to do with the homework. I was the assistant superintendent at the time. My phone rang, and I spent a good first 45 minutes of that conversation listening. There was
Hmm.
no getting a word in edgewise, none at all.
Yeah.
And after that, I just sat back and listened to all of it.
Sure.
There was an aftercare issue. There was a rushing home from work issue. There were all of these different pieces. And I said, well, have you taken advantage of Healthy Kids? And she said, what is that? Well, she wasn't getting the communications that there was an after school program that was available. She wasn't getting the communications that there were situations, financial support in order to be involved in that. She
Yes.
wasn't getting the she wasn't connecting to those resources.
Hmm.
And once we connected her to those resources, we connected her to, we actually happen to have carryover from people who were working in the building, who were working in that program after school, who sat down with that particular child, ensured that all of the assignments were in place, made sure that took place, and that they ate their snack and whatever. And then by the time that child was going home, that
Yeah.
piece was taken care of, and that stress or that feeling of I can't do one more thing was being lifted off those parents' shoulders. So
Yes.
it's about building that relationship, and sometimes it's about being quiet for 45 minutes.
Great example. Great example. Um, you speak passionately about starting to design ecosystems of learning and
Mhm.
referencing families as co-educators. So let's take that example and and pursue it even further. What does that look like when you're trying to engage the community as co-educators? Um,
So
at
we saw a lot of that in COVID. Um,
True,
right?
true. Yeah,
So we can see that because it showed up as how do I even it was a necessity.
right.
It just sort of once we got to this point that children were home, even if we were sending resources and um had access to the technology to be able to continue the connections.
Hmm.
Bottom line is that there was somebody who was on the ground at home that had to act as teaching assistant and sometimes teacher in order for the concepts and skills that we were trying to teach at school to carry over to the learning spaces that they were in, even if it was just taking pictures of students' work and sending it back to the teacher and sending it back to the parent, et cetera, et cetera. All of
Yeah.
that was going on. It involved adult intervention. And I had so many adults say to me during that period of time, I had no idea that this is what went into it, that this is what it looked like, that the construct of a lesson, I sit in the background, I hear high school teachers teaching physics on one side of my house and middle school teachers teaching social studies lessons on another side of my house, and I had no idea of the structure that went into these things and the time and the skill that they had. And parents say, no one prepared me for this. I had to learn it, right? And and that's the and that's kind of where it came out. um, I also had parents tell me that there were barriers that were put in place.
Sure.
So for instance, in one household, since 99% of the communications and the things that were happening were coming in English, and one of the parents in the household had not fully transitioned as an English language speaker in that
Right.
household. There
Mm.
was one parent who was fully responsible. All of the responsibility fell on their shoulders and not and the other parent couldn't help because
Okay.
they couldn't there was no system for them to be communicating with the schools in the South.
Hmm.
Um, so what do we teach parents about what it is that we're doing? And what do we listen to with parents regarding the things that they're doing to support their children's learning at home? I use an example of a friend who was frustrated at the time the child was in first or second grade
Hmm.
and was struggling with nonfiction text.
Yes.
And she didn't understand because the child would come home and read, but and she could read the words that were on the page, and they were telling her that she wasn't scoring to be able to move on to the next level in their reading group because of different pieces.
Yeah.
And I said to her, the next time I come over, I'll sit with her, I'll bring home a book, and I will read with her to show you. At the
Mhm.
end of, say, 10 or 15 minutes of reading with her and questioning and showing how you look at a book when you're a teacher and the such,
Mhm.
the friend looked at me and she goes, no one ever taught me that. No one ever taught me that that's how you're supposed to ask the questions. I see her reading the words, but they're telling me she's not reading the nonfiction text, and I didn't understand that. What they really should be using in the words were that she was not comprehending the nonfiction text and connecting it to real world examples.
Yeah.
There's a very educated parent who did not know how to read a book. and what
Right.
the expectations of reading in a book in school are, and how are we communicating that. Um, Making those connections, explaining to parents, giving the opportunity to learn these things. Um, how are we doing that? Are we
Right.
co-creating opportunities for learning with them? Are we talking about how life experiences and the things children do at home carry
Mhm.
over to how they understand and comprehend the work that we're doing in school? When you take your child to a local historic site and just read the sign in a park at a local historic site,
Yeah.
they suddenly come back and recall that information when we're teaching about that historical event in middle
Mm.
school,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, you know, the the, the I always find it interesting in the region that I work in
Hmm.
because I am in New York and the such. When I took my child to Albany and we drove by the Schuyler Mansion,
Hmm.
and my child suddenly making the connection between Alexander Hamilton and the house that they're standing in front of,
Yes.
right? And going back to school and being able to discuss that in history, right?
Yes.
I stood in front of the house. I now understand that this was a real life thing that happened, right? Um, or just around the corner from the school district, in walking distance from the school that I worked in,
Hmm.
um, there is the Odell House, which is currently the new, I believe, as of a couple of months ago, the newest chartered museum site in New York or in the Northeast or whatever it is.
Ah.
It's also the Odell House is the headquarters of the Rochambeau encampment, which was
Ah.
most of Lower New York.
Yes.
And the house itself is smaller than the house that I live in right now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But children drive by that every day and didn't realize that the history that they were learning about was physically the community that they live in.
Right.
And we provide opportunities for our families and our communities to understand what those sites are and what the connections to those sites are to the learning that they have going on in school. You have to treat families as co-educators,
Yes.
that they have valuable experience, that a child who is deeply involved in, say, baseball has a whole lot of, valuable experience in working as a team and communicating and learning drills and playing games and
Mhm.
learning sportsmanship and connecting what we then know about that family and that child to how they engage in the classroom.
Yes.
Those are really important pieces. Um, my all three of my children learned public speaking through 4-H. Okay.
Ah.
They for public 4-H, it requires when you do a 4-H project every year, it's not just show my animal at the end of the year. There's a component of it that's public speaking, right?
Sure. Sure.
And I feel confident that from the time they started doing this at 5 years old, that by the time that they were 10, that they could pretty much stand up in front of the room and talk about anything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And do parents in the community know that those resources are available for their kid? It costs about $25 a year to belong to a 4-H group.
Right.
And that in addition to the agricultural based and community based learning that they do, that they're
Mhm.
actually learning that particular skill that then carries over to schools.
Right.
Are we connecting them to all of that? Um, we don't give guidance necessarily on home learning routines. We don't necessarily give guidance on supplies and the types of things that people can have available at home, um,
Right.
that maybe get children to step away from ever prevalent technology sometimes and engage in other types of learning and practice.
It's
So,
so true. It's so
yeah.
true. And you talk in the article, you all your examples show making learning relevant. And you talk about relevance as being a bridge, and it's two-way. So in the same way parents and families can inform us, as to how to make the curriculum more relevant and how to make the school experience more relevant to children. What experience and insights do you have about that? Because we're historically, we're the experts, we're the ones calling the shots, we're the ones that, you know, have the degrees, but how do we flip that so that it is a two-way conversation?
We have the degrees in education, but our communities have the degrees in everything from, life experience to military experience to very specific types of skills in the arts and management and banking and all the rest of that.
Yes.
We should be looking and knowing our families enough that when we're teaching finance, that we're pulling in those families who are working in finance, everything from a teller to somebody who's doing portfolio investment and working on fund management and all the rest of that. We have those people who can come in and can talk to us about how to structure the learning in the classroom based on what those real world experiences are. That's different than holding a career day where somebody comes in and talks about how they're a fund manager. And let me tell you what my job is like. This
Right.
is bringing those individuals into our conversations when we're writing the curriculum, and saying, how do these things look when compared to the real world? Here are
Yes.
our goals and objectives. What have we missed? What other types of experiences can children have? What do mentorships look like? What do internships look like? Are we designing our learning to allow children to have agency to think about and look at their interests and then bring those learning interests back into school? International Baccalaureate uses the structure where there are projects such as the exhibition, which is at the end of the PYP Primary Years program, which is a
Yeah.
group project on a particular idea that the children have shown interest in, and then what did they do to learn about that project, and how can they have something that find something and do something that impacts their community. Then you merge into the MYP, which is the middle years program, and on a level, the personal project or the community projects are an extension of that, but in a personal way where children are working with some sort of mentor or guide who helps them to do the same thing, but individually. Those are examples of how we use our community and we use our teachers differently and we use our students differently and we use our families differently. So,
And you do a great job at the second half of the article at offering some tools, a family feedback reflection tool, and an ecosystem mapping tool, which will be very helpful because we need to kind of shift our how we frame this in our own heads if we're
mhm,
going to build the relationships and bring all these community stakeholders in to help inform our work.
mhm.
So thank you for just a wonderful article, and for all the work you're doing. I didn't mention at the top of the interview, retired just last year, and
Retired less than a year ago.
yeah,
Just
and
at the end of the most recent school year.
yeah,
Um, yeah, after about 34 years in education, in all levels, from classroom learning to working as a consultant to teaching at the adjunct level to yeah, being an executive level administrator, all of that. And now I've just taken that and kind of wound it into what I'm doing now, which is working with schools and consulting with schools in a very similar way. So,
well, I love that you hit the ground running in retirement. I did the same, and I think we just have that need. We know that there's still ways to make a difference, and so thank you for continuing that work.
yes, and thank you for our partnership and
Yes,
this conversation and all the conversations that we've had. Yeah,
a-
my joy of
absolutely.
doing it is taking all of these ideas that I've had and just putting them down on paper. Sometimes they come out fast, and sometimes they percolate for a little while, but that's been the joyful piece of retirement. So,
Absolutely. You have the time and the focus and without other demands. So
yeah.
yeah, they're not easy questions. And so when they flow freely, wonderful. And
Hmm.
when they need time to percolate, well, okay, because these are not easily solved questions. But I'm hoping in this period of dismantling and disruption that it creates an environment where we can make some shifts and we
Hmm.
can make things better. And your voice is a critical one in helping us rethink what that looks like. So
Thank you.
excellent work.
Thank you. So.